Becki, welcome back to Minerva, and today I'm here with a sew-along video for you. So today I'm going to be making the Ogden Cami, which is a really beginner friendly pattern for just a really simple cami top. So I've got my pattern here. The fabric I'm going to be using is this lovely cotton lawn fabric from Lady McElroy. It's a really lovely lightweight fabric with a nice bold floral print on it. So that's the fabric I'm going to be using. I've also got some Gutermann Sew All polyester thread in the shade 111. And for this project I'm also going to be using my handy loop turner tool as well. All of this is available on our website and it will be linked below. So if you want to pick up any of the supplies that I use in this video, you can go down and check there and they'll all be available. We also have a whole different range of fabrics that would be really lovely to make this top in as well. So go and take a look at that. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces according to the cutting layout in the booklet. And what you should have is your front and back cami pieces, your front and back lining pieces, and your two straps. Okay, so once you've got all your pattern pieces cut out and you've transferred all your markings from the pattern onto your pieces, the first step is to stay stitch the neckline, and you'll need to do this on the front cami, back cami, and both the lining pieces as well. What that is, it is just stitching that you do round the neckline in order to stop the fabric from stretching out in the wrong direction as you're sewing it. So the instructions say to use a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and stay stitch from the top point down to the edge of the armhole, and then from the top point to the middle of the V. So you do need to make sure you do it in the right direction, and then you do that the same from the point to the V and from the point to the bottom of the armhole on the other side, and do that to all 4 pieces. So the next step is to start preparing our straps. The first step of preparing the straps is to fold them in half, right sides together. Give them a quick press and pin that in place, and then we're going to stitch them at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so once we've sewn the strap with that 1/2 inch seam allowance, the next step is to trim the seam allowance down so that we can turn the strap right side out. So we're just going to trim that all the way down. Just like that. And then we need to turn this loop right side out. Now this can be quite fiddly, so I would recommend, if you haven't done this before, maybe practice on a scrap piece of fabric first. There are a couple of ways you can do this. You can use a safety pin pinned to one end that you then feed through inside and feed it all the way through to turn it the right side out. But I'm going to use a handy little loop turner tool today, and these are available on our website. They come in packs of 3 for 3 different sizes, so you'd be able to use them on a variety of different projects. And how it works is it has 2 parts, one that is essentially a stick and one piece that looks like a straw, basically. So you pop the bit that looks like a straw just inside the loop, just like this. And then use the stick part to push the fabric in, and this is a bit fiddly, so I would just take your time, and you just want to push the fabric into the straw, and then you'll feel it feeding through, and then all you do is push that all the way through. And there you go. That is your loop turned right sides out. It does crease the material a little bit, so you will need to go and give it a good press it nice and flat, which is what I'll go and do now. But these really handy loop turner tools make that job so much easier, quicker and less fiddly. So I would highly recommend. Okay, so once we've got our straps ready to go, the next step is to attach them to the front cami piece. So on the right side of the front cami, what you need to do is match the strap up with the dot that you copied off of the pattern. So you can see I've got the dot just here. So I've put it on with a water erasable marker pen, and I did check on a scrap piece of fabric first that it does come off, it doesn't mark the fabric permanently. That's always a good idea to double check before you use it on your main pattern pieces. So I've got that there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my straps and I'm going to line it up with that dot, and so the raw edge of the strap lines up with the raw edge of the top of the point of the cami piece here. So it should look like that. So it's lined up with where the dot is, and then the raw edges are lined up together. And I'm just going to pin that in place. Okay, so I've repeated that on the other side for the other strap. So in exactly the same way, lined it up with the dot and matched the raw edges together. So both of the straps are now pinned in place on the front of the cami. So what we're going to do is baste them in place. So I'm going to increase the stitch length on my sewing machine, and at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, baste these straps to the front of the cami. The reason we're basting them is because they get fully attached in between the cami and the lining later on in the sewing process, and it also gives us a chance to do a bit of fitting before we fully commit to the placement of the straps. So I'm going to go ahead and baste these in place just now. Okay, so once our straps are basted in place to the front of the cami, the next step is to actually start assembling the cami pieces together. So what we're going to do is, with right sides together, we're going to take our back cami piece and pop that on top of the front cami, and lining up the notches at the side seams, we'll pin those together, pin the seams together, and then sew all the way down the side seams at half an inch seam allowance. You then will need to finish your side seams in your preferred method. So I'll be using the overcasting foot and an overcasting stitch on my sewing machine to finish my seams, but you could also finish them with a zigzag stitch or an overlocker if you have one, and then you'd need to finish your seams and press them open. So you're going to do that on both sides of the main cami pieces, and then repeat that for the lining as well. Okay, so that's all done. So the front and back pieces are sewn together and the edges are finished and pressed open, and I've done that on the lining and the main cami pieces. So the next step is to hem the lining piece. So you need to fold it up by half an inch twice, and then press that and pin that in place, and then hem all the way around the bottom of the lining piece. Okay, so that's the lining all nicely hemmed. So the next step is to attach the lining to the main cami piece. So how we do that is, with the lining wrong side out and the cami right side out, what I'm going to do is pop the main cami inside the lining, just like this. And then I'm just going to match up both pieces all the way around the neckline and the armholes, and match all the notches and seams together. And then once I've done that and it's all matched up, I'll pin it all in place, ready to stitch it together. Okay, so that is our cami all pinned to the lining. So cami right side out, the lining's wrong side out, so the right sides are together. And I've pinned all the way around the neckline and the armholes. So we're going to go ahead and stitch around the armholes and the neckline with a half an inch seam allowance. But just a couple of things to note before you get started are it recommends reducing your stitch length when you get to areas like the bottom of the V at the neckline, front and back neckline, and also where the straps are, and that is just to add some more strength to those areas of the garment. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to leave your needle in order to turn the fabric when you get to those V-shaped areas. So you would stitch along to here, leave your needle in and raise your presser foot up, and then turn the garment, pop your presser foot back down and carry on stitching, and that will give you a really nice, neat, sharp V shape in those areas. You're also going to want to make sure that the straps at the front are straight down and out of the way. You don't want them to get caught up in your stitching, because that would leave you with an awful lot of unpicking to have to do, and we want to avoid that. So just make sure your straps are straight down in between the cami and the lining and out of the way of your stitching. If you want to, you could pin them to the main cami to keep them out the way. You could do that if your fabric isn't too delicate, but if you have got quite a delicate fabric, you may not want to, because you don't want to put any holes in the main cami piece. So just make sure they're nice and out of the way. Just be careful and conscious of that as you're sewing. And last thing to note is on the back, when we get to the strap, where the straps are attaching on the back, what you're going to have to do is sew all the way up to that dot, and then stop and start again on the other side, and then carry on. Because we're not going to fully attach the straps until a bit later, so you need to make sure you leave a gap here for inserting the strap a bit later on. So just sew up to about here, stop and start again on the other side, and then that leaves you room to attach the straps properly later. Okay, so that's all stitched together now, and once you've stitched it, the next step is just to put some snips all around that stitching. So you're going to want to put one at the centre front V, and one at the centre back as well, and then just a few around the rest of the neck hole and the armholes. You obviously don't want to snip through your stitching, so just small stitches just like this, and what that does, it's just going to help this lining turn nicely and sit nicely the other way when we turn it out. So once you've done your snips all the way round, the next step is to attach the straps to the back of the cami. So how to do this is making sure that you're not twisting the straps as you go. You just want to bring the strap, which is just under here, around under the armhole, and then pop it and push it up through to meet that dot that's on the back. And so again, the raw edge of the strap sits flush with the raw edge of where this arm section is here. Now I find it quite tricky to push that strap up. I find I lose the end of the strap quite a lot, and I find that a bit tricky. So a little tip is I'm just going to attach a very small, just going to make sure it's not twisted, I'm going to attach a very small safety pin to the bottom of this strap, just like this, and then I'm going to use that to help me guide the end of that strap up through the gap at where it attaches at the back, and that will just mean I don't lose it in the fabric. So that is a tip if you are struggling with that as well. So you can just pop that safety pin and just very gently use the safety pin just to pull the strap up until it's sitting flush where that dot is at the back of the cami. So that's just a little tip to make that a little bit easier for you. Once you've done that on both sides of the cami, this is a really good fitting opportunity before you go ahead and stitch that permanently in place. So you could either pin it and then try it on just to make sure the straps are sitting correctly and they don't need any adjustment, or if you don't like trying things on with the pins in, you could just do a basting stitch across here and very carefully try the top on to make sure you're happy with where your straps are sitting. So go ahead and attach both of those straps in that way, and then check the fit, and then once you're happy with where the straps are sitting, you can go ahead and stitch them at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, closing that gap that you left when you did all your sewing. Remember to reduce your stitch length as well to add that extra strength to this area of the garment. Okay, so when your straps are all stitched in place, you're happy with the fit and their placement, what you're going to want to do is just take a small pair of scissors and just trim down the seam allowances around the areas of the dots, just to remove some of the bulk for when we turn it. So just like this, you just want to snip off some of the seam allowance around the areas of the dots, just to remove a bit of bulk from those places. Just be careful you're not cutting into the straps or anything, and that will just help it sit a bit better. So we are all done with that, and we're really getting there now. There's just a few steps left. So the next job is to turn this all right side out. In order to help turn those corners, you can just really carefully pull on the straps and it will just pull that corner through. Just obviously do it quite gently. So we'll get this all turned right side out. Okay, so this is what our project's looking like now, and once we've got that turned all right side out, what you're going to be doing is pressing this the lining, and the inner seam allowance, which is this bit just under here, this seam allowance joining the lining and the cami together. You're going to press both of those away from the cami. So you're going to kind of lay your project out like this, and press that seam allowance and lining away from the main cami. Once you've done that, what you're going to be doing is understitching that lining to the seam allowance. And what that does is it stops the lining trying to fold out when you're wearing the top. So it just gives you a really, really neat finish. It can be quite a fiddly job. So if you haven't done it before, I would just suggest going really slowly and just being careful that you're not kind of catching any of the main cami pieces as you're going. So I would go really slowly if it's not something you're really confident with yet, and just keep an eye on things. It is also worth noting that you're not going to be able to do this the whole way round. So you won't be able to kind of press and stitch all the way up to where this strap attaches. You just won't be able to get there. It's too small an area, so don't worry about that. Just do the bits that you can do easily, mainly around the front centre V and the back centre V, and that should do the job just fine. So press both the lining and the seam allowance away from the main cami, and then you're just understitching the areas that you can easily get to help that lining sit the right way inside the top. Okay, so hopefully you can see I've just done that. So you can just see this little row of stitching just here is what it should look like. So nice and close to this seam. And then if you turn everything the right way out again, just like this, you can see that from the front, so what you'd be able to see when you're wearing it, you can't see any of that stitching, but the lining is now sitting quite happily on the inside of the top, and it's not trying to turn out. So that is the nice neat finish you get if you do that under stitching all the way around. So it's looking really lovely. So we're pretty much finished now. There's just two things left to do, which is to hem the bottom of the cami in exactly the same way that we did with the lining. So we're just going to fold it under by 1/2 inch twice, and then just hem all the way around the bottom. And one final step that can just help keep that lining in the right way is on the inside of the top, using a hand sewing needle, can be just to tack the lining to the side seam on the inside of the top. So you could just do a little tacking stitch just here, to that inner seam, and that will just make sure your lining stays on the inside and doesn't try and come out. And when you've done those 2 steps, your cami will be finished. So I'll go ahead and do those 2 things now, and then I will show you what the final top looks like. So this is the final top, and it's come out absolutely beautifully. If you have a go at making one yourself, please do make a profile on Minerva and share it with us, as we would love to see. Thank you so much for watching today. See you again soon.